Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in, and thanks for joining the Doing Tech Better in Government podcast. I'm Brian Fox. I work with Omni Federal, partnered here with ATARC to host this. Thanks to them, and also really glad to have Christopher Crist from US Transcom joining us today. Chris, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, of course. Glad to be here, Brian.
Absolutely. Chris, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and your role there?
Yeah, of course. So, I have the great opportunity to be here at U.S. Transportation Command, and I'm currently the Chief of DevSecOps and Enterprise Transformation. But I do have to, this may sound cheesy, but yeah, I really am thrilled to be a part of this here. U.S. Transcom has an amazing mission. It really is an amazing 24/7 global mission. We're involved with just about everything you can think of when it comes to the efforts in Ukraine, or when it comes to Afghan evacuation, or COVID response, COVID support, just about anything you can think of, we're part of it in some way. So to be a part of helping to, modernize the technology that the command uses, it's really, really impactful. But other than that, I was the CIO of a few different private sector organizations beforehand. Really dove into some leadership roles, but yeah, nothing compares to this. So yeah, glad to be here, glad to be part of the organization.
That's exciting, and it is an important mission. I was lucky enough to work there for a little bit, not as important a role as you have, but I always equated it to like the FedEx for the US military. And it's really fascinating how they have such a diverse set of impacts. Like you said, everything from humanitarian response to supporting the warfighter. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But regarding your role there, right, and modernization, regarding all those agile methods, cloud-based capabilities, DevSecOps methods, tools, what have you all been able to accomplish there in your time?
Yeah, so I think something that I want to bring up is that just 3 years ago, the command decided to put together a division, DevSecOps, right? A division named after the methodology, and they put me in charge of it, and I had no people, and so they said, okay, grow your team and make DevSecOps happen. Right? So that was an awesome opportunity, but as you can imagine, that's something that can be a challenge. But because we have about 77 different programs of record, and those programs of record can consist of many different applications, up to 12 applications sometimes in one program of record. So here in our command, one program of record can have thousands of people that are supporting it, just to keep it going. And it's like each program record is in an organization in and of itself with its own culture. So we've moved to move forward with agile methodologies with those programs, try to get them to go to the cloud. And we've certainly been successful in a lot of those realms, and get them to move towards DevSecOps and working with all those different programs across the board to make it happen. And so some successes that we've seen, as challenging as that has been, and we can go into details a little bit later, but we've been able to set up that enterprise environment, a US Transcom GovCloud enterprise environment, cloud environment for all of these programs to use. We've seen some successes there for sure. We have DevOps services there that programs can use if they're ready to use them. And then, we've really worked with the programs directly on their modernization journey, setting up their contracts to appropriately, have the appropriate wording as they move forward, their PWSs, things like that. And then actually working with some of those programs to modernize. It's really exciting to see legacy-based programs and how over the course of a year and a half we've been able to modernize those to being containerized, microservices, things like that. Really, really cool. And so right now we're finishing up on a really exciting project where we're setting up a standard software factory with security control gates, for our programs to use so that they can get a continuous authority to operate.
That is really cool. Thanks for sharing all that. And my next question for you, Chris, would be, where did it all start? Because Transcom has so much activity within the Joint Command, but there's also all the service based commands that are subordinate to it, AMC, right. MSC, and then the SDDC, right? So there's, like you said, there's so many programs, there's so many systems and applications enabling. What were some of your first steps to help move the needle? Where'd you start?
Yeah, that certainly was very difficult. Yes, this command does consist of all those different component commands, as you mentioned. And so we had to get started with getting integrated. And that was very hard to do because we were just this new team. I had never been a part of the government, civil service before. So I didn't know any of these folks at US Transcom. I had no relationships. And so we were just the new kids on the block who were trying to tell them what to do. At least they probably felt that way at first. But it was more about, okay, how do we get integrated in what they're doing and let them know that we're a partner and trying to move forward with modernization rather than, dictating to them what they need to do. And yes, that was difficult. We had to get integrated in a lot of meetings. We then had to set up some standard meetings. And then eventually I think the value came in where I was able to plug in some of my DevSecOps experts into their technical problems. And we were to solve some of their problems. And then we had to build trust from there. But that is how we got started. We got integrated with the programs, had to shift our mindset towards getting plugged into their problems, solving their problems in current situations that weren't even DevSecOps related. So then they could trust us that we knew what we were doing, and then overcoming that. So yeah, that's I would say how we got started is getting integrated.
Can you share what like some of those early problems that you were able to help them solve? What those included? Because that is interesting. Oftentimes there can be all the automation, the improved management practices of Agile and DevSecOps, right? But oftentimes folks don't want to go there yet. They don't trust you, like you said. But with them, what's in it for me? And by the way, here's my challenges and problems of the day. And if you can solve those, you build trust. How did you all end up doing that? What were some specifics, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I could go a lot of different paths on that for sure. I'll go with we had to close the gap between myself and my DevSecOps professionals. We just want to we think of the future. We know what DevSecOps is. We know what it's capable, the benefits of it. And so we get really excited about just let's get there. However, what we started to realize is that it's a new world for a lot, at least it was 3 years ago, and it still is today to an extent. It's a new world to these folks. You bring up DevSecOps, and it's just totally, it's this foreign thing, and it scares people. And so we had to build. What we had to do is we had to build our knowledge of what we were calling legacy practices, but we had to build our knowledge of the way that these folks were doing business today, or at least 3 years ago. So, okay, how are these security folks doing security today? And how are the ops folks doing ops today? And so we had to spend the time because it was something we weren't really too familiar with. And we had to dig in, be side by side with them, ask questions, see what they're doing, see what they're going through. And I think an example, Brian, of maybe something that we overcame was that a waterfall way of doing things was the developer would create the product, of course. They would say, okay, we finally have delivered something. They would hand it over to a completely different team via CD, by the way. And then they would do their configuration management, their security checks, and all those things on the other end. And if they found any problems, they then shot it back to the developers who then had to fix those problems, and then went back and forth until finally they shut it over to the operations team, who then they ran into problems too sometimes. And so what we were able to do is we were able to remove a lot of those steps, and to then push code directly to, in a cloud environment, right? Being able to bypass that whole having to put it on a CD and hand it to another team. Instead, the developers could do a lot of these things via automated security checks via the DevSecOps pipeline, right? So I think that was the first example that we were able to do is remove those hops, if you will, and really focus more on the DevSecOps pipeline.
And Chris, you mean CD like compact disk, not continuous deployment, right?
That's
right.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And you were a newcomer. You were bringing new methods, the opportunity for new tools and automation. I'm sure there were folks that were allies to you, maybe to your left and right within groups. What were some critical enablers in those first steps you took? Who helped you, and how did they help you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Going the term ally there, and we absolutely necessary. We actually call them champions, but basically same thing, right? That the people that are going to advocate for the cause. And we really had to reach out to some forward thinking. Thank gosh we had them. I don't know what we would have done without them, but we had some forward thinking individuals in the security department and a couple in the operations department, because of course that was a challenge in and of itself. Where the DevSecOps and our command was siloed. Every one of those had their separate divisions, and so yeah, we just really hung on to those forward thinking individuals and tried to develop connections with them, even though they weren't in our division. And that worked out really well. They were able to then advocate for the cause and then, brief up, if you will, educate up to their leaders. And again, I think that enables, you bring up, one of those enablers, first critical steps. I really had to emphasize once again, for anyone out there who may be listening to this and thinking, how do we make this happen? I'm telling you, at least for us, US Transcom is a huge command and we have a lot of people to work with. And in my opinion, when we look back at what made this successful for us, it really was connecting back to what people currently know versus where you want them to be. That was the connector. Because when I first sat down 3 years ago with a security expert and said, hey, we want to get to a continuous authority to operate, they said, that's impossible. That's not going to happen. And really what you need to say is conditional ATO rather than continuous. And I thought, okay, we got a lot of work to do. So now that individual is on board, right? So it just took connecting what they know to where it is that we're trying to go.
And that is interesting, right? As a change agent, having that empathy for the current practice, like you said, taking the time to learn. I just would love to highlight that. Sometimes that can be forgotten from a consultant standpoint, or taking the time to learn what's going on there. You've moved the needle. Things are continuing to improve, right? What are some challenges you're continuing to face, though, as you push to help modernize the applications and systems at US Transcom? Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for that one, because that one's one of those things that we were talking a lot about at the most senior level here in the command. And what I've been expressing up to and giving the message all the way up to our 4-star is that we thankfully, it's no longer an argument on if we should do DevSecOps. Thankfully, it was, but thankfully, it's not at all anymore. We no longer have anyone saying, hey, this doesn't make sense or we can't do it. Everyone's on board. However, now the challenge is, okay, we have all these different programs and their different component commands, as you mentioned. And so as we move towards modernizing, really at this point, a goal is to get towards using that standard software factory with security control gates so that we can get that CATO, right, that continuous authority to operate. However, if everyone does their own modernization journey, then the odds are that they won't be able to meet the control gates of a standard software factory, which means they'll never get a continuous authority to operate. So now the challenge is, okay, we need to the extent that we can, get all of these programs to modernize to the same control gate standards. And that's what we're working through right now. And that right now, I think is certainly a challenge. And even more so than that, which we can touch on a little bit more, I think, in our next portion here is changing the roles of people who work in the command. Their jobs look different, and that is a challenge as well.
Let's go there. What does that look like, or what is that shaping up to be, and how are folks that you're working with, engaged with, viewing that? Because in my experience in government, what can be interesting is folks have pretty much a permanent job, but then change can be so scary, despite the fact they might just have to change what they're doing or change their title. But to go from like installing servers to now managing AWS services, right? Same person, probably just picking up new funner skills, potentially. But how are you engaged with that, or engaging with that? Because that is real. It's that fear factor. It's that emotional fear factor.
Yes, it's that for sure. It's a fear factor for sure. People are afraid, they're concerned about what it means to them. But it's also a couple of things. The thing is, what I've struggled with this, because as soon as people have DevSecOps experience, it's so hard to keep them. They're so great. They have so much great knowledge, but I think that we're seeing in the industry that more and more people are seeing the benefits of this DevSecOps thing, right? This magic thing called DevSecOps. And so I think that we saw the trend of your top companies were ahead of the game on it, right? Your Googles and your Netflix and all those people. Of course, the government, the DoD, closely was behind them. And now we have the rest of commercial and industry that's catching up. And so then, of course, they can pay quite a bit. So I've lost some DevSecOps professionals to AWS and all these other organizations, and they get paid so well, and they have flexibility, and they don't even have to move. They work on East and West Coast, but they're right here, still living near me in the center of the United States. So it's hard to compete with that. We have to continue to adjust there, but also, yeah, the skill set thing. So we are working with the operations folks and security folks of today, and showing them and teaching them how things will look for them in the future, because their skill set is still definitely needed. And we're actively working to have those conversations that are kind of tough sometimes, but to say, hey, we can use you as we move along with these new methods that we're doing.
And Chris, absolutely. I think as folks continue to learn, they get that opportunity to move on, but then they can also get really excited, really stoked about the mission. Is there anything y'all have done? I'll use that word again, to stoke that passion, to get folks and keep folks excited, so that it's not just about the money, right? It's about the opportunity for impact, change, etc. Over to you.
Without a doubt, sometimes I feel like that's the one thing that we can continue to push on, because me coming from the private sector, I know without a doubt that the impact I get to have here is far more substantial and more meaningful in a way. Not that what I had done before was meaningless; it certainly was meaningful, but this is on a much larger scale. And so when it comes to my team, especially after lessons learned of seeing their opportunities, because you keep in touch with those folks, right? You find out, okay, what are your reasons for leaving? And you find out, okay, we have a trend here. It's because they want to remote work or 100% telework, or they want to do this and this, they want flexibility in their jobs. They want, all these things. And so, we're actually working right now to try to see what we can do to at least mimic some of those things. But I think that the bigger thing is certainly the impact, as you're talking about, Brian. The big thing is continuing to express to them that what they're doing has XYZ influence. And like, for example, and we get plenty of stories all the time. Stories are really, really helpful. But I'm actually a medical service corps officer in the Air Force Reserve. And one of the systems that we use is actually a transcom program called Traces. And whenever we're deployed, whenever our military members are deployed, or if they get wounded or hurt while they're out there, then we use the system to do aeromedical evacuation. We get them to the nearest place of safety, and then from there, we get them to the nearest solidified hospital facility. And then from there, we either get them back to the field or back home to their families. And that system, we're improving right now via DevSecOps, right? And all those other methods. And if we can do that, then we just improve that capability. We improve how we get people from point A to B who you're either going to get back in the fight or get back home to their families. And I think that story resonates with quite a few of our folks here on how what they're doing matters and how it impacts, the folks serving our country. So yeah, we can give plenty of those examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the opportunity to work, at 18F, USGS, NGA, and didn't matter where it was, the impact was different, but it was always huge. It was different, but always huge. So yeah, I think you have a wonderful opportunity there. You talked about how the modernization journey can be so different for folks. I'd like to go back to that, because in the military, right, if anyone who's listening that's served, any veterans on there or current uniform members, it's all about uniformity. Why is your uniform not squared away like everyone else's? Dress right, dress. Do you think within DoD that makes it easier for, hey folks, here is the journey, it's laid out. Maybe we'll tweak, we'll make some exceptions, but this is also to make it easier for you. It's one less thing to think about. Just like speaking of uniforms, the t-shirt and the hoodie, right? You get going,
Right.
I can solve bigger problems. Anyway, what do you think about that, Chris?
That's actually that's where I think you and I can have the conversation for hours. I now I understand your comment earlier about talking for 3 hours, because this right here is a topic that I think it's very interesting to me because actually as surprising as it may be, each of these, I think maybe it's a joint command thing. You know, I don't know if it's, you know, maybe it's Air Force is Air Force and Army's Army. You know, we have this joint command effort in our Army command, by, you know, when in comparison to our Air Force command or Navy command, which is military secret command, they're all so different. And their approaches have been so different and they think differently. It's just the culture is so different. But what's funny is even in their own component, even in their own commands or areas of influence, their programs are moving in different paces and different tools and methods. So believe it or not, Brian, you know, even though we're part of the military, these programs they've really all kind of done their own thing. And we're trying to get ahead of that because I think there is some great benefit in having the customization, you know, allowing people to do what they want to do. But really on the other side of it, though, it makes it very, very, very hard to achieve these things we're trying to achieve from a modernization standpoint, you know, and I could go on many examples for that. So yeah, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is no, we still have a lot of customization. We still have a lot of differences and unique ways that developers code programs. And yeah, we're trying to get ahead of that and get back to maybe a little bit of standardization without binding them, by the way.
Right? Yeah, and just because there's a path laid out that shouldn't be binding, right? The opportunity for exploration, some discovery and innovation, but why reinvent the wheel? Some things should just literally be pulled off the shelf and allow folks to start moving, right? Yeah. Well, sounds like y'all are really pushing the needle there. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Chris?
I just you know, I imagine this experience here has been really great, and I've been able to communicate with quite a few folks out there that are trying to make this happen. You mentioned reinventing the wheel, and we're not. None of us here, thankfully, are really needing to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of folks out there in the you know, federal space that are seeing successes in making this happen. And so, you know, it is hard, it is challenging, and oh my gosh, you know, are you going to have some tough conversations with some folks? But we're not the only ones. There are plenty of us trying to make this happen, and I would encourage you to reach out to any of those folks or myself on lessons learned, and because I fully intend to take it to the next job opportunity, right, and then see what I can do there. And so, yeah, I think we need to remember that, you know, we're not alone in this, and but it's worth it, right? This is worth doing. So yeah, just keep it going.
Absolutely. It is worth it. All those systems create so much impact, even if they have very few users, right? That's a big one in DoD because the missions are so critical, so important. And it's not just about wartime operations, you know, Transcom's humanitarian aid support. None of that happens without Transcom and those subcomponents making it happen. So, but thank you for your time today. This is wonderful to connect as always. And for the community out there listening, if you would like to get on stage, just like Chris did today, just reach out to me, brian.fox@omnifederal.com. You can also reach out on LinkedIn where this is going to be posted later. You can just DM me there. We'd love to get change agents in the federal space up here sharing. As Chris was describing, it's not just about the methods, sharing the methods and the tools. It's also about the courage to change, because it does matter, and it's not going to happen overnight. And so it's important to keep pushing the needle. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to keep moving this conversation. So it just helps everyone else. Chris, thank you so much again for your time today.